see in your eyes. The same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand, men of the West!
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
That's an ongoing national security threat.
I need to share another quote from the piece, and Steve, I want you to talk about it on the other side. Without obvious parallel in U.S. history, a situation in which the personal insecurities of the president and his refusal to accept what even many in his own administration regard as objective reality have impaired the government's response to a national security threat. The repercussions radiate across the government.
It's an amazing story. Look, I've said before, as a general proposition, the male ego is a delicate flower. What this shows is that there is one flower more delicate than all the others. The insecurity, the thin skin.
You are comparing President Trump to a delicate flower.
A delicate flower. Such a sensitive ego. It's remarkable. He took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. This wasn't an attack on the Clinton campaign. An attack on the elections process is an attack on the sovereignty of the United States of America. The evidence and the intent is plain. And from a national security perspective, this is how foreign powers, some of them hostile, manipulate this president. Give him a nice red carpet, throw him a big parade, pat him on the head,
a dance
scratch
show.
him behind the ears, because nothing overwhelms this titanic ego, this supernova of narcissism. Not duty, not the country, not the security of her people. This is a remarkable story because it offers such insight to how his ego overwhelms his duty to protect and strengthen the country.
But then could one make the argument then his ego and his lack of response to clear evidence that there was Russian interference, doesn't that propel collusion beliefs? Doesn't that hurt his own son, Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, who appear to be in the hot seat, or at the very least the crosshairs of the Robert Mueller investigation? Well, doesn't that make an argument that that pushed the appointment of this special prosecutor, Robert Mueller?
I think there's a substantial lack of evidence to suggest there's room in his heart to care about anyone other than himself across this first year of the presidency. I don't think that's part of his calculation here. What we know is the ego on him is so powerful that it opens up a wormhole, if you will, into this alternate reality.
But it makes it worse for Don Jr. and Jared. The reason, when we get these denial after denial after denial for the president, that's why we believe, or people believe, there's more smoke.
There's 330 million of us in this country. It makes it worse for all of us. This was an attack on the election process of our democratic republic, and he has done nothing.
It is Friday, December 15th of 2017, and West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is now open. If you notice the board out front, the daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. That's right, we'll imbibe with a few spirits in this material world. Yes, folks, the esoteric always exists in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, folks, apparently, now I was reading around, and the Republicans say that the internet is free again, and it does beg the question: when has it ever been free? Because we pay quite a bit to keep Netroots Radio going, and it was really because of our listeners' generosity that allows us to do that. I think what the GOP means when they say the internet is free again, it's free for them to make it into a monopoly. Yeah, because they were really restricted from doing it before. So, way to go, Ajit Pai. Or is that Ajit Pai? Thanks so much. We will remember. And now Maxine Waters says it's not over, and you don't mess around with Maxine. So we'll see where this is going to go. But to absolutely ignore the fact that the comment section was completely hacked with over 2 million stolen identities, which is a crime. And they wouldn't take part in the investigation. I wonder. It says something. Looks like Donald Trump called up Vladimir Putin to thank him personally for the talking points about how great Don's presidency has been for the last year. And but he has nothing to do with the Russians. Okay, just you got to hold those two things in your head. Now, if you're a critical thinker, it's really hard. But if you're, I don't know, what is it? The 20% or less, the 17% of the population that are Trump cultists, you can hold those two thoughts in your head. And they do. Oh, my God. Okay. Well, another big news day, and what's going to blow up over the weekend? I mean, every weekend something blows up. It just is hard. It's so hard to keep up. Blake Farenthold, I guess, is not going to run for re-election, and you would hope that he doesn't. That weird guy, Representative Al Balderoso from New Hampshire, who once said Hillary Clinton should be shot for treason. Well, he's gonna run again for speaker in 2018 in New Hampshire. So Hillary Clinton shot for treason. All right, I'm just hold that thought in your head, and then if you can, no, we better not. We are Democrats. We don't go that far. I would just like to see the guy frog marched to Leavenworth or some federal facility while awaiting a trip to The Hague, by the way, which might take, a few years, 10 or so. Frog march that guy to a federal prison for treason. I know people are going to parse with me about, well, he couldn't have done it for treason, maybe sedition. I'm all, a foreign hostile power is still working actively to take over the United States. And we need to wrap our minds around that even more. So, what are we looking at today on the menu that we have worked very hard in the kitchen to prepare for you? Well, let's get into that right now. We're here in the front cafe. We have some, a good little starter to our meal, and more intimate meal back at the chef's table later on. So in the front cafe, well, of course, that was Steve Schmidt at the top there, opining on Trump's delicate flower of an ego. Speaking of an ego, Danny Deutsch has a blockbuster revelation that the Secret Service has to warm up the crowd, a la Ed McMahon, for any of Trump's appearances, whether it be a bill signing, a speech, anything. It occurred to me that there probably could be many listeners here to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy and Netroots Radio that have no idea who Johnny Carson was, let alone Ed McMahon. But just warming up the crowd, you get what I mean here. What is a little bit humorous to me about this is that mostly the crowd are White House staff and Trump advisors. They have to be warmed up for Trump's appearance. Get him in the right mood. Oh, my gosh. Okay, so for the rest of the menu, I better get on this. We're just eating up everything here in the front cafe before we even have the rest of the dishes on the table. Put down that bread. Okay, we'll examine why Alabama Republicans just cannot admit that Doug Jones won fair and square. ICE, yes, Immigration Customs Enforcement, kept 92 immigrants shackled on a plane for 2 days in slave ship conditions. And since so many of those immigrants are being deported, Paul Ryan, yes, that Paul Ryan, says white American women need to have more babies to stimulate economic growth. Now, if that isn't a libertarian Handmaid's Tale, I don't know what is. Well, of course, then we'll break down the front cafe and conceal it, disguise it as just a regular cookbook store, because then we'll go back to where the speakeasy is, which is at the chef's table. And we're going to have an examination of the unusual amicus brief co-written by 14 former U.S. officials refuting key points of Trump's Russia denial. And amid news that 2 of Trump's judicial nominees had been summarily rejected by congressional Republicans, lies a darker truth, much darker. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. All right. This first dish off the menu to get us started here at the front cafe is by Stephen Rosenfeld from Alternet. Roy Moore cannot get a recount under state law, a growing chorus of legal scholars said, despite what the state's top election official and the Senate candidate himself might have you believe. Moore, of course, told rally-goers Tuesday night that the race is not over and that it will take some time. It looks like Roy Moore cannot request a recount in the Alabama Senate race if the margin is greater than 0.5%. There's an automatic recount for the 0.5% range. Now, that was written by Rick Hassan, a University of California Irvine law professor and curator of the nation's most influential election law blog. Last night on CNN, Alabama Secretary of State John Merrill got it wrong, saying that Moore could pay for a recount in the larger range. The statute does not allow this for federal offices. As of midnight Wednesday, Democrat Doug Jones had 671,151,000 votes to Moore's 650,436 votes, a margin of victory of 1.5%. The automatic recount is when it's 0.5%. The election also included 22,819 write-in votes, which is what Senator Richard Shelby, Republican of Alabama, suggested Sunday that his fellow Alabama Republicans submit. Now, Hassan's comments, which were affirmed by other election lawyers on his listserv, highlight the latest dubious behavior by high-ranking Alabama officials surrounding the controversial U.S. Senate election. Controversial. On Monday, a Montgomery County court issued an order telling Merrill to instruct all county election officials to preserve the digital images of every ballot that is scanned and counted. That involves checking one box on a software window after turning on the scanners. Merrill appealed the ruling to the Supreme Court of Alabama, which, as we reported earlier, was reversed. He had reversed the lower court order and undermined any chance of creating a full public record for a possible recount. Now, the Supreme Court of Alabama quickly issued its order without hearing from attorneys representing Alabama citizens, the actual 4 Alabama citizens seeking to preserve the ballot images. Now, I would say that, this can work both ways. If you were using a sort of active measure in which to undermine certainty in our institutions. Win or lose, you can always say the deep state did it. And as I remind folks, the deep state in Alabama has always been what's known as the old boy network. So give me a break. Okay, now if it wasn't bad enough, later on Tuesday, Merrill told CNN that Moore could pay for a recount, which, when, as Hassan and other election lawyers have noted, the state's election law does not allow a recount unless the victory margin is under 0.5%. Okay, the Washington Post's Philip Bump took a closer look at the preliminary vote results, which have not been officially certified. Before Moore spoke on Tuesday night and refused to concede, his campaign chairman said there were still uncounted ballots from overseas military personnel. Well, the problem is that there weren't over 20,715 ballots in military absentee ballots in which to overcome the margin of victory that Jones had over Moore. Okay. While the election is not officially over until Merrill, the Secretary of State, certifies the results and Jones is sworn in, which under the electoral calendar must happen by January 3rd, it's very unlikely that the most partisan Alabama Republicans can stop Jones from taking office. While some Senate Democrats have already demanded he be sworn in immediately, the most likely timetable is after the GOP-led Congress rams through its only major legislative action of this year, a regressive and widely reviled tax bill. On the other hand, Bump said no one should hold their breath for Moore to concede. In situations like this, when a candidate is favored to win after months of campaigning but comes up short, it's hard to tell if a refusal to concede is motivated by sincere concern over the result or simply a dogged refusal to accept reality. Well, I would say it's a dogged refusal to accept reality, because this guy can't believe that God would actually allow a Democrat to take office. Now, it doesn't have to cause him to drop a complete belief in his Christianity. But, you might think that God works in mysterious ways. And if he's all-powerful, does he really matter who wins the football game? Come on! Remember, Trump said that he was going to contest the election if he lost. Remember that? This is a strategy. It's almost like active measures. But, as I've said before, I'm a romantic. All right, next course up here is by Carlos Ballesteros from Newsweek. Immigration and Customs Enforcement capped 92 Somali immigrants chained on an airplane for 46 hours in, quote, slave ship conditions, end quote, in a botched attempt to deport them back to Somalia earlier this month. A botched attempt. The plane carrying the Somalis, chartered by ICE Air Operations Division. Wow, this is almost like Aircon? What? Made a pit stop in Dakar, Senegal, 10 hours after taking off from Louisiana. But the plane never made it to Mogadishu. Instead, after being parked on the tarmac for nearly a day, ICE turned around and made the 4,600-mile flight back to the United States on December 9th. Well, I guess if you have all the money in the world to carry out your titanic quest to be the master race, you'll have a bureaucracy that feels like this is just perfectly okay to do. According to one of the men on the plane and an attorney for two others, ICE deprived the Somalis of adequate food, water, and access to a working bathroom during their 2-day detention on board, forcing them to urinate in empty water bottles or when they ran out of water bottles on themselves. I know we're in the front cafe, and this might seem a little unseemly to be discussing, but this is abhorrent. I'd like to see the overhead cutout of the plane to see how they stack these 92 Somalis on the plane. You know, like they used to have those cutout drawings, illustrations of how you would pack slaves in the hull of the ship. You know, to get the maximum slave in the space that you have. Sure. Airplane's air conditioning system was dysfunctional, making it hard to breathe in the crowded cabin. And other immigrants said that one of the Somalis was hit in the face by ICE agents. We were shackled for nearly 2 days. We were treated like slaves. Rahim Mohammed, 32, a diabetic truck driver and father of 2 who was on the plane, said. We weren't allowed to use the bathroom or get out of the plane. I was not given the medication I need. It was a horrible thing. I thought my life was pretty much over. For Rebecca Sharpless, an immigration law professor at the University of Miami, who has been following the situation, it's a gross violation of basic decency. I think it should be a violation of human rights law. But, as I keep saying, I'm a romantic. I remember the old days. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the old days were a myth. According to ICE, 61 of the Somalis had criminal convictions. You never know. Those parking tickets can stack up, and there might be a warrant out for your arrest, you crook. Give me a break. And the rest were picked up for being in the U.S. without proper authorization. Most of the immigrants have U.S. citizen spouses and children. Yeah. One of the lawyers said that her client has one misdemeanor from 2005, probably for pot. You criminal. ICE did not give an exact reason as why the plane could not make it to Somalia. The 92 Somalis are currently held in 2 detention centers in Florida. That way, you know, they had to fill those. Maybe they had to fill the beds. There was a contract to fill those beds. These Somalis are just sitting on the tarmac. Bring them back. We need to make some money and fit this bottom line. Don't you know the quarter and the year is almost up? We got to start balancing these books now. An ICE agent informed the Somalis on Wednesday that the agency expected to carry out the deportation sometime next week. Merry Savage Christmas. Kill a Christmas tree, kill a Christmas tree. How sharp are thy branches. Of course, you know, life is a musical, and in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, it's almost like a Jacques Demy movie. Maybe the Parapluie de Cherbourg, the Umbrellas for Cherbourg. At least that's what I would like to believe. All right, this last course that we have here for the Front Cafe, before we break it down and disguise it deftly, is just a very quaint cookbook store, so that we can hide the speakeasy and the fun and games back there at the chef's table after the break. This last course is by Aaron Rupert out of Think Progress. During a news conference on Thursday, that was yesterday, House Speaker Paul Ryan urged American women to have more babies, saying their lack of procreation was stunting economic growth. Well, in this reporter's opinion, I think he means white American women. People, this is Paul Ryan. I haven't really gotten my Paul Ryan rendition down as well as I should, so excuse me. People, this is going to be the new economic challenge for America. People, Ryan said in response to a question about entitlement reform. I like that. People as a commodity. Just do what the telecoms are doing. Alluding to the fact that he's a father of 3. Oh, yeah, I've been getting it on. Ryan added, I did my part. But we need to have high birth rates in this country, meaning baby boomers are retiring, and we have fewer people following them in the workforce. How could we make up that possibility of low birth numbers? Yeah, well, if there's a possibility of bringing brown people in, we don't want that. I think that's what he's really saying. We have something, this is Ryan continuing, we have something like a 90% increase in the retirement population in America, but only a 19% increase in the working population in America. So what do? Be smarter, more efficient, more technology. Still going to need more people. And when we have tens of millions of people right here in this country falling short of their potential, not working, not looking for a job, or not in school getting a skill to get a job, that's a problem. Are you talking about all of us old people? We're now a train? Wow. So, I don't know. I know that Paul Ryan's dad passed away, and I believe it was a tragedy for him. But I always ask, would you kick your parents to the curb? And some people would say, yeah. It's called get back, the way that they treated me when I was growing up. Well, and there's millions more that don't believe that. While it is true that birth rates in the U.S. have been declining, that's not necessarily bad news. Exactly. Now, you know, I had this romantic belief that maybe if we had less population in the world, it would probably maybe tax the environment less, and we could maybe exist on this luminous sphere a little bit longer before it all gets consumed by the red giant eventually. Okay. Furthermore, there's an obvious solution to the problem that Ryan completely ignores, allowing more immigrants into the country to fill the jobs being vacated by retiring baby boomers. But instead of using his position as House Speaker to pursue immigration reform, Ryan has intended to be on board with Trump's hardline anti-immigration positions, including the president's insistence on spending billions of dollars on a border wall. And you know it's only going to be a few million at most, and the rest is going into Trump's pocket by way of the Trump Organization through a Cypriot bank. That's how they do it. And other Wisconsin Republicans believe that women should be handmaidens too. On the floor of the Wisconsin State Assembly last month, Wisconsin State Representative Scott Allen argued on behalf of a bill that would prevent insurance plans for state employees from covering most abortions, saying more births are needed to spur economic growth. Labor force shortages are tied to population declines. Labor force shortages are a limiting factor in economic growth, Allen said. And limiting economic growth poses a problem when government tries to pay for public services and infrastructure. In spite of this, Mr. Speaker, ironically, the Democrats continue their effort to support the abortion industry, thereby destroying our whole economic structure. They are mad scientists, all of them. And that's not to make science a bad name. These are faux scientists, fake scientists. Okay, let's get to our break, and we'll come back and have everything set up at the chef's table for you. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Thursday, December 14th, 2017. I'm Mark Belanger. In the United States, the right-wing Republican Party is taking advantage of its control of Congress to push through a tax reform bill, which will hurt working people and increase income inequality in the country. A vote on the tax bill is expected before the end of the year. Unions are fighting back by mobilizing their members against the legislation. Organizing the efforts at the national level is the AFL-CIO, the largest labor federation in the U.S. It represents some 12 million members in 56 unions.
Hi, I'm Liz Schuler, Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. And I want to talk to you for a minute about why the Republican tax bill is so dangerous and why we need to fight back. We all know tax reform is hard, but what's easy to see is that this bill is terrible for working people. It's nothing more than a bunch of tax giveaways to millionaires and billionaires at our expense. Here are some of the biggest ways it will hurt working people. It kills jobs by giving huge tax cuts to big corporations that outsource. It punishes states that make the kind of investments that create good jobs. And incredibly, many middle-class families will see their taxes go up. Households making between $20,000 and $40,000 per year would ultimately pay more in taxes. It's especially harmful to seniors and people with disabilities who have high medical costs because it ends deductions for out-of-pocket medical expenses. And it's really bad for students. It'll hurt millions of working Americans who pay student loans by ending the deduction for student loan interest. And hey, there are benefits if you make more than $500,000. And Republicans actually want to pay for all these tax cuts by slashing Medicaid, Medicare, and education funding. We cannot allow this to happen. Real tax reform puts the needs of hardworking people above the 1%, Wall Street, and big corporations. This is not that bill. This is a job killer. Stand with working people and ask your member of Congress to vote no on this tax bill.
The United Nations agency focused on matters of work in the world is conducting a global inquiry into the effects of new technologies on the future of work. The UN's International Labour Organization, the ILO, has been asking labor organizations to have discussions about how new technologies will affect their members. One of those organizations is the International Transport Workers Federation. The ITF is facing major changes such as the introduction of driverless cars and the rise of unregulated companies such as Uber. Rob Johnston is the ITF's Assistant General Secretary.
We need to engage more people, and I believe the ITF are one of those bodies that can help in that process. We do represent 16.5 million workers, but actually beyond that, we represent a lot of communities and the family of those 16.5 million. So we can be a powerful voice in arguing for the change, assisting the change. But what we need to be able to do is make the argument that it's beneficial to all and not just a few. In Germany, currently there's negotiations going on around a collective agreement, which will look at the impact of automation and the best way to deal with that. But if you're a transport worker in India, for example, that can seem a hell of a long way away. If you were an informal taxi driver, sleeping in the back of your cab, working 24 hours a day, trying to earn a pittance, trying to feed your family, that is a long, long way from where we are. And I think that's the thing about automation as well. When you consider that 70% of the world's population will be living in urban cities in the next 10 years, when you think about the ability to travel from aviation, through airports and things like that, and also the transport infrastructure that will need to support those cities, there are some major, major challenges ahead. Not to mention that 50% of the world's population will live in two countries alone, which is India and China. How do we address that? And how do we make sure that automation is something for everybody, wherever they live, whatever region, rather than just to the benefit of a few?
Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Prime Minister Theresa May suffered a major defeat in the British Parliament on Wednesday as members of her Conservative Party joined the opposition Labour Party to demand an up-or-down vote on a final Brexit deal. May tried her best to convince lawmakers that their input would be taken seriously, but those promises weren't enough. While Parliament could conceivably reject an eventual Brexit agreement, May put on a brave face on Thursday and said the UK pullout from the EU was proceeding smoothly toward a 2019 target date.
I'm disappointed with the amendment, but actually the EU withdrawal bill is making good progress through the House of Commons, and we're on course to deliver on Brexit.
One of Colombia's largest criminal gangs has ended an insurgent campaign against the Colombian government. Los Urabeños, also known as the Gulf Clan, operates several of the most lucrative drug trading routes out of Colombia. The group is also notorious for kidnapping and human trafficking. This week's surrender came as the Colombian government closed in on many of the gang's leaders as a part of a broad crackdown on criminal networks. And Zimbabwe's president is calling on the U.S. and other Western countries to lift economic sanctions on his country, saying economic restrictions were holding back growth. President Emerson Mnangagwa succeeded Zimbabwe's longtime ruler Robert Mugabe last month through a process that resembled a military coup. Mnangagwa has since promised political reforms and said new elections scheduled for next summer could take place even earlier, but those promises weren't enough for the U.S. government. Earlier this week, a top State Department official said the U.S. would only re-engage with Zimbabwe after new elections are held and political institutions in the country are fully demilitarized. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
All right, so thank you for accompanying us back to the chef's table, where we have a little bit more of an intimate conversation about the issues of the day. And before we start off with the main dishes and spirits, since it is Blue Moon Spirits Friday, let's go through the weather. Local weather here along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon. It is currently 29 degrees. We have a forecast high of 49. I will be lucky. 49. Maybe it'll get to 45. Maybe it'll get to 42. There is rain in the offing, and it feels, as I went out into the garden, it felt like it might want to snow. So I got that going for me, which is I've been wishing for a snowy Christmas, except it's not Christmas yet. Come on. And so yes, we are expecting showers a little bit later when it gets warmer, and that will be going through the day and night and subsiding a bit tomorrow. Air quality index has gone from unhealthy to moderate at only 97 parts per million, and that's not good for those with breathing problems. Pressure has come down just a tad to 30.27 inches. Visibility is 7 miles, and humidity is at 77%. That will be going up. It feels more than 77% right now. Okay, so weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations, and these people live around the world. London is currently 42 degrees and clear. Paris is 42 and overcast. Rome is 58 with rain. Both Paris and Rome continue to have a wind advisory to knock out infrastructure, so beware if you are traveling into those fabulous cities. Kiev is 35 degrees with fog. Kabul is 47 with fog, which, if you're having a wedding, now's the time. Hard to see, even with the infrared on those drones. Hard to see. So your wedding party may be safe if you're having a wedding in Kabul. Now's the wedding. This is when the wedding season should be. And if I was going to be a wedding planner in Kabul. Hong Kong is 67 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 38 degrees and mostly cloudy. Brr. Sydney, Australia is 68 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California, 51, partly cloudy. And New York is a bitter 26 degrees Fahrenheit and clear. I don't know. Not bitter. If it's clear, it must be beautiful. All right. That is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations, and these people live around the world. First big dish here at the chef's table is by Elizabeth Preza out of Raw Story. Former U.S. government officials who served in both Republican and Democratic administrations co-wrote an amicus brief in relation to a lawsuit brought against Donald Trump and self-described dirty trickster Roger Stone. Well, dirty trickster isn't really the self-description. I think it was rat fucker. But this is a family paper, apparently. The brief, described by former federal prosecutor Renato Marriott, is unusual and didn't lend support to either party in the case, which was brought against Trump and Stone by 3 individuals who had personal information stolen from the DNC servers and subsequently published by the transparency organization WikiLeaks. The suit alleges Trump, Stone, and, quote, those they conspired with arranged for the hacked information to be provided to WikiLeaks, end quote. But the filing, signed by 14 former national security, intelligence, and foreign policy officials, outlines Russia's active measures to influence the U.S. election and undermine confidence in democratic leaders and institutions. It also refutes a key Trump talking point that this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. An excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election they should have won. It's all a hoax. Believe me. According to a U.S. official intelligence assessment, Russia conducted cyber espionage operations against targets associated with the 2016 presidential election, starting during the Republican primaries, and distributed information obtained through those operations, as well as a wide range of propaganda and disinformation to undermine faith in the U.S. democratic process and in the general election, influence the results against Secretary Hillary Clinton, the brief reads. Now, I would argue, though they can't put this into a legal proceeding, but these active measures have been going on since before the Cold War. Just giving it a little historical perspective. it shouldn't be surprising that these active measures would be taking place. That's what Russia does. Okay, it also described the Kremlin's efforts to recruit cutouts to bring operatives closer to targets. Cutouts can be anything from an unwitting accomplice who is manipulated to act in what he believes is his best interest to the ideological or economic ally who broadly shares Russian interests, to the knowing agent of influence who is recruited or coerced to directly advance Russian operations and objectives, the official state. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia and Ukraine, Michael Carpenter, said the former officials wrote the brief to inform the court and, by extension, the American public about the subversive character of Russian active measures campaigns. Now, is Trump's ego so inflated that he can't accept? I mean, he doesn't think that there's actual collusion. Is it true that maybe he did not actually collude with the Russians? But his ego demands that he won, in his mind, fair and square, and to acknowledge that the Russians helped him would diminish that? Is that what is all driving this? Or is it possible that Donald Trump owes Putin a lot of money? I don't know. I'm thinking somewhere in the midst of all this, and it might have even happened back in the mid-'90s with Trump and Putin. The horse head scene from The Godfather, that part, I'm wondering. Okay, one of the key points we make is that active measure campaigns are almost always carried out using local actors who enable Kremlin agents to get closer to their target and gather information on how best to achieve their desired goal. For example, establishing a corrupt relationship that can be later exploited for purposes of blackmail or manipulation. I'm thinking when the knee breakers come on that scale, it's more than the knees being broke. And when you're dealing with Putin, there's the convenient heart attacks, there's the convenient falling out of a 5-story window while moving a piano, but you don't own a piano and you're not even moving it, but somehow you fell out of a 5-story window. There's the convenient polonium poisonings. There's the convenient, just getting gunned down while walking down the staircase from your apartment building. Convenient. Okay, that statement calls to mind the one by Carpenter about being exploited for purposes of blackmail and manipulation. That statement calls to mind Trump's former national security advisor Michael Flynn, who pleaded guilty last month to one count of lying to the FBI after he failed to disclose the nature of his conversations with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Former acting Attorney General Sally Yates testified in May that she had informed the White House a week after Trump's inauguration she feared Flynn was compromised and that Russian intelligence could blackmail the high-ranking U.S. official. 18 days later, after that concern was raised, Trump fired Flynn. The timeline and circumstances surrounding Flynn's dismissal is one of the elements being investigated by Robert Mueller, and Yates was interviewed by Mueller's team in July. Another former campaign advisor, George Papadopoulos, has likewise pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. One-time Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his deputy Rick Gates await trial next May on a range of charges, including conspiracy to launder money and acting as unregistered agents of a foreign principal. I should also remind folks Sally Yates was fired purportedly not for outing Flynn, but for not enacting Trump's arbitrary Muslim travel ban. But they looked at Sally Yates as, oh my God, they found us out, and we're just like starting off this crime spree. All right, as we're finishing up here at the chef's table on Blue Moon Spirits Fridays at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, I don't normally access or call from HuffPost, but this particular article by Jennifer Bendry was cited in every single article I was reading about this, so I thought, well, I'll just go to the source reporter, and I am. So, of course, this is once again by Jennifer Bendry from HuffPost. Almost a year into his job, Donald Trump's biggest accomplishment isn't any specific legislation that's passed or executive action he's taken. It's how he has reshaped the court. And I would just mention and remind folks that this has been put in place by Republican leadership, recalcitrance strategy by the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society at least since the mid to late 80s. And actions before they were active and official organizations were occurring as well. And let's not forget Merrick Garland. I'm looking at you, Mitch McConnell. Trump is breaking records with his judicial confirmations. Remember how many they held up for Obama because he was black? Do you remember that? I do. The Senate voted yesterday to confirm James Ho to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which bumps the number of Trump nominees approved for the circuit courts to 12. That's more than any president has confirmed in their first year in office since the circuit courts were created in 1891. He surpassed Presidents Nixon and Kennedy, who had 11 circuit court judges confirmed in their first year. For President Barack Obama, the number was 3. And Republicans didn't waste time celebrating their achievement. Chuck Grassley was tweeting gleefully. This is in addition to the Senate confirming Trump's Supreme Court pick, Neil Gorsuch, and 6 of his district court nominees. The circuit court judges in particular will have a tremendous effect on the way the nation's laws are interpreted. These are lifetime seats on courts one level below the U.S. Supreme Court, which only hears between 100 and 150 of the more than 7,000 appeals cases it is asked to review by circuit courts. That means circuit courts are often the final word in thousands of cases. There's a clear theme to the president's judges. Many are young, conservative, opposed to abortion, and LGBTQ rights. Oh, yes. Let's meet a couple of them, okay? Amy Coney Barrett, 45, is now on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. She previously questioned the precedent of Roe v. Wade and condemned the birth control benefit under the ACA as a grave infringement on religious liberty. What about the religious liberty of the women who want to be able to take medicine? What about their religious liberty, I always ask. Let's see. She also took a speaking fee from the Alliance Defending Freedom, a nonprofit that's defended forced sterilization for transgender people, and has been dubbed a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. John Bush, age 52, is now on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth. He's referred to abortion to slavery as the 2 greatest tragedies in our country. Well, I think slavery is a great tragedy. Abortion is a woman's right to choose a medical procedure that she and her doctor have figured out themselves. He has also said he strongly disagrees with same-sex marriage, mocked climate change, and proclaimed the witch is dead when he thought the ACA would not be enacted. Kevin Newsom, age 44, is now on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th. Let's see. He argued in a 2005 article for the Federalist Society, hiss, of course, a right-wing legal organization that is behind many of Trump's court picks, that Title IX does not protect people who face retaliation for reporting gender discrimination, and the Supreme Court later rejected that position. Perhaps the most alarming of Trump's judges is Leonard Stephen Graz, confirmed this week to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit. He earned a rare and unanimous not qualified rating by the American Bar Association after his colleagues essentially described him as a real jerk who can't separate his advocacy for his role as a judge on issues like abortion and LGBTQ rights. Among other things, Graz, age 56, pushed to amend the Omaha City Charter in 2013 to let employers discriminate against LGBTQ people. And he served on a nonprofit board that backs so-called conversion therapy. Well, part of that is that they're making money off of it, too. So there's that aspect. So, okay, and then let's look at Ho, the most recent today. He donated thousands of pro bono hours to First Liberty Institute, a conservative legal group that takes up cases opposing LGBTQ rights. Their clients include the owners of Sweet Cakes, an Oregon bakery fined for refusing to serve a lesbian couple, and a newspaper editor fired for writing a post condemning the LGBTQ XYZ crowd and the Gestapo for trying to make their sinful nature right with God. Okay. Well, I think that it's unfortunate that they would bring their beliefs and prejudices and biases to the court, but that's exactly, I think, why they were chosen, isn't it? The White House has not been meaningfully consulting with senators before announcing nominees, and the increasingly partisan and politicized processes undermine respect for the White House, the Senate, and the courts, making judges appear to be politicians in robes. These phenomena are detrimental to separation of powers and the health of the republic, indeed. All right, well, let's close up shop here, and we'll be back here on Monday for another fantastic hour of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And, of course, our daily special for Mondays is River City Hash Mondays. So please check in with us then. We'll have, for the rest of the day on Netroots Radio, Hartman, of course, coming up about 6 minutes after the hour, followed by Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! And Randy Rhodes filling up the rest of the afternoon. So stay tuned to Netroots Radio 24/7, 365. Please do. And we will again see you on Monday for River City Hash Mondays in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.